Hey everybody, and welcome back to another installment of Brand Federation's Beer and Brands, our excuse to travel around Richmond to breweries and talk about two of our favorite things, beer and brands. My name is Matt Williams. I'm the managing partner at Brand Federation, and I'm here with Kelly O'Keefe, our founder and CEO. We're at Basic City Brewing in Manchester in Richmond. Before we go too much further into this episode, it's only right that we add our voice to the many voices who are expressing support for the brave people of Ukraine as they fight against the invasion of their country by Russia.
You know, sometimes our world needs to be unified, and I'm excited that so many people have stood up against this battle and this invasion. And I'm also excited that while this is a reminder that there's a lot in this world that's more important than brands, it's good to see brands all over the world who are disconnecting their commerce with Russia and using their economic power to put pressure to end this conflict.
Absolutely. We're going to talk more about how brands' influence can affect things positively and negatively in the world as we go on with this conversation. But before we do that, I want to bring in Bart Landman, the co-founder and mayor of Basic City, who's going to tell us what we're drinking today. Bart, what do we got?
We have two of our flagship beers. One, a lager, which is our Daily Pills. They say in the industry that you don't talk too much about a Pilsner or a lager, you drink them and enjoy them. But in this case, if I were to say something, it is a classic style that has the American craft contemporary approach. It is an unfiltered lager Pilsner that is 4.7% ABV. I think the name sort of speaks for itself. Our Daily Pills, we drink a lot of it and regularly. You're drinking the Basque, which is our flagship DIPA. That is a Citra forward. It's got Falconer's Flight as a hop character. It's hazy, juicy, a New England style IPA. I'd say if you could call a DIPA sessionable, that's the one, but it is 7.6% ABV.
All right, cheers. We'll be careful. Thanks, Bart. We'll have you back in just a couple of minutes, and we'll talk more about what's going on with Basic City. All right, Kelly, cheers. Let's kick it off.
All right, let's go.
All right, so obviously with everything that's going on in the world, we're seeing lots of evidence, positively and negatively, of the power that brands have to influence how people behave, how people think, what happens in the broader world around them. Where do you think brands' influence comes from?
I think it comes from a couple of places. One, we are a very capitalistic society here in the United States. And part of being a society driven by commerce is that advertising is a loud voice in terms of the overall communications that we take in every day. Mm-hmm. So we see more advertising messages than most of us would like to see, but they have influence. They tell stories. They connect with us. And so one way that brands have influence is they just simply are spending a great deal of money to communicate. And if they steer that communication toward more responsible choices, more responsible dialogues, they can have an impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's undeniable that brands are cultural forces, right? Now, if a brand is a cultural force and we agree that culture influences people's behavior, it influences the way they express their identities, well then brands have a direct impact on that and can influence people both consciously and subconsciously in positive and negative ways. And it's something that I've always thought that we as brand managers and brand stewards need to be incredibly careful about and thoughtful about.
There's no question. The other thing that drives brands' influence, I think, is that these are brands that represent organizations that have often tens of thousands of employees. And the best of them have employees who are aligned around a perspective of how they want the world to be. Mm-hmm. And call it a conviction, call it a purpose, call it a North Star. Brands often are a tool that is used by corporate America and the world around to create alignment around the people who work for an organization toward a perspective on the world around us. We're becoming more driven by purpose, and that purpose is making these organizations make decisions about what side of issues they want to stand on. There's probably no better example in recent years than Nike's stand on Colin Kaepernick. At a time when the general population in America was somewhat divided about whether Colin Kaepernick's move to take a knee during the national anthem was a negative issue or a positive message. Nike said, well, we know where we stand. We believe that it's a positive message. We believe in the rights of athletes to stand up for what they believe in. We believe that we could do better as a country in terms of honoring people of all colors, and we're going to take a stand here.
Yeah, there's a philosophical and practical debate on that area, in that issue that we've been bandying about in the business world for decades, right? Ever since, on the philosophical side, Milton Friedman came out with his famous essay about how the role of the corporation is simply to create value for shareholders. And the corporation shouldn't be wading into political conversations. It shouldn't get into cultural conversations. It shouldn't be picking sides. It should simply make whatever decision it needs to make to optimize its economic return to shareholders. How do we think about that in light of today? Because it was written at a different time.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly naive to think that any organization can operate without any regard to what is right or wrong about the world around them. And I think we're coming to a time when organizations are starting to acknowledge, honor, and ultimately act on their responsibility to not just sell us product, but to do it in a way that elevates society.
And there's a practical consideration that goes with that philosophical debate, which is that it's clear, based on lots of research that's out there, that the people to whom I want to sell my product want to know where I stand on things, right? They're acknowledging my own cultural influence as a brand, and they're asking me questions that maybe they didn't ask 20 years ago. So not only do they want to know how my product functions and whether it looks good or works the way it's supposed to work, they want to know what the philosophy behind the company is and what I stand for on issues that they think are important. And they use that as a purchase criteria in a way that maybe they hadn't before.
Absolutely. I think it stems back to a shift in the way that brands are built today. We used to build them based on the USP, the unique selling proposition, that one feature or attribute of a product that made it different from the other products, and we would lean into that particular attribute and the benefit that that attribute offered and turn that into a brand. So Whisk made your collars cleaner. God knows why your collars were dirty in the first place, but Whisk took care of it for you. We really got connected to product attributes, but we live in a world now with technology where the difference between products is minuscule. If somebody has a competitive advantage with a product, their competitors catch up to it very quickly. And when products are a little bit closer together, then consumers stop evaluating whether or not to do business with a brand based on those functional attributes. And to your point, they evaluate a brand based on whether it's aligned with my own belief system.
Yeah.
And that's why we're seeing a need for brands to take a stand and to understand that it's okay to have a point of view about the world around you, to act and speak on that point of view. It's not only okay, it's what the best brands are doing. It makes your brand stronger.
It's so interesting to take this into a real world example that just happened this week, where Disney, one of the most beloved brands in the world, came under a lot of fire with their new CEO refusing to come out for or against or with a point of view from Disney on the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. Right? He specifically said, we're not going to take a position on this, and he caught a lot of flack for it.
He did, and rightly so. First of all, Brand Federation is a company that isn't afraid to have a point of view. And so, Mr. DeSantis, that bill sucks.
We're here to say gay.
Yeah, we are here to say gay and to try and ostracize educators and others who acknowledge part of our humanity that we should be proud of and embrace.
Cheers.
Yeah. So you know where we stand on that issue, but we didn't know where Disney stood on that issue until today, I think, when finally their CEO decided to stand up against that bill. Way too late. That's a no-win situation. That's not what brands should do. If you haven't thought about where you stand on issues as a brand, if you haven't already planned for how you might respond in a situation like that, then you need to do that, and you need to do it quickly.
Mm-hmm. You made an interesting point off camera while we were talking before we started shooting here, that he has put himself in the worst possible decision by coming out, in the worst possible position by coming out the way he did. Talk more about the no-win situation.
Oh my God, we've seen it again and again with brands. It's a cultural mistake that does happen from time to time. By not rejecting this bill early on, what he did was to essentially say Disney did not care about the issue and therefore did not care about the LGBTQ customers that they have, and the people in Florida that are employees of theirs. And so he angered that audience. But then when he flipped and switched his point of view, he also angered the audience that believes that bill is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. So he's now succeeded in pissing them both off.
Yeah. When you're worried about whether or not which side I'm going to go on, don't go against both. Brands do it all the time. We've seen it dating back to, I think it was Jaguar, who got flack because they were advertising in a gay publication. They were proudly doing it. They thought they were really being smart, and economically they were really being smart. But when they started to get flack from certain family groups for that advertising, they then backed out.
Yeah.
Well, they weren't a friend of either group at that point.
You lose them both.
Yeah,
you lose them both by doing that. It's an amazing strategic misstep. If we take this conversation into the context of the dominant story in the world, which is the invasion of Ukraine, clearly we're seeing brands stand up and take action on that. I was reading in the New York Times today that at the most recent count is that over 320 brands have stood up and said we are not going to do business with or in Russia.
It's really impressive. The vast majority of brands doing business in Russia have now exited that business. And they've done it quickly. I mean, this is not a decision that you can take months to make. They have done it very quickly, and they've exited. And some of them, like Caterpillar, has significant economic activity going on in Russia. They've still pulled out. I'm impressed with that. There are a handful that haven't. I'm not going to mention any names, much as I would like to, because that list is changing day to day, and more people are stepping away from it. And I do want to acknowledge it takes a little while to terminate your operations in a country as large as Russia, but it's exciting to see that the brands have stood with the people of the Ukraine and rejected this.
It's such a difficult position because it's clear that they're making we can say, because we're not afraid to state our point of view,
That's right.
that we think they're making the right decision by removing themselves from Russia. But the short-term pain of that removal is not going to accrue to Vladimir Putin. It's not going to hurt the oligarchs. Those other sanctions that are imposed may. But a brand pulling out of Russia is going to hurt the Russian people before it hurts Vladimir Putin. And there's something that we have to be a little ambivalent, at least I feel a little ambivalent about. So, McDonald's pulls out. Okay, good for you. They don't want to be an economic subsidizer of Putin's war. But Putin's not eating at McDonald's. He's not relying on McDonald's for his food today. Millions of Russian people are, and they're the ones who are going to feel the pain.
Yeah, I think a lot about that, especially as someone who's spent a lot of time in that part of the world. There are beautiful, kind, generous people in Russia, and for them, this is a difficult time. But even with that said, it's important for those individuals who live in Russia to understand the cost of Putin's folly. Mm-hmm. And I do think long-term this will be known as Putin's folly. They need to understand the stakes. They need to understand how the rest of the world is looking at this. And once again, as we've said, brands have the power to communicate and to send messages. Mm-hmm. This is a message that needs to be sent, even though it may be a painful message. It's also a painful message for us to pay higher gas prices, and in some cases higher prices for our goods, maybe see our 401k take a little bit of a hit. But if we're not willing to pay a price to stop a move like this, then we're not really the kind of people that we would like to aspire to be.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's just a terrible position that so many millions of people are in right now because of this move that it's just tragic. I'm also confident that there are conversations going on in the boardrooms or the marketing suites of every major brand right now, not just around the issue of how should they treat their operations in Russia, but hopefully about what they can do as a company to help where they can with what's going on in Ukraine and how those companies and their operations can help the people who need the help. Right?
Yeah, I hope those conversations are going on. I know they are in many organizations. And I think the more that companies do what they can to make an impact, and not just to punish Russia, but to support the people of Ukraine in any way they can. I think that's important to do right now.
Yeah, so you can talk about it from a humanistic standpoint where, okay, if I happen to be fortunate enough to have those kind of resources at my disposal, I like to use them to help the people who need the help when they need it. From a strategic standpoint on the business side, if as we've said so many times on podcasts like this, that if the behavior of brands do more to explain to me what that brand's about, what it cares about, what its purpose is, watching that brand act in a way that helps people when they need help is going to have a positive impact on the way people think about it in the world. It's going to play into those purchase decisions that they make based on the values they think brands hold. And it's going to send an incredibly important message to the people who work at those companies that this is a company who's willing to put its resources where its mouth is and help people in the way that maybe only they can help them.
Yeah, it does something else. It shows that they're listening and that they're paying attention to the world around them. Mm-hmm. You know, if you're watching television at night and you've been watching the news for 2 hours, following the atrocities, the hospital that was attacked last night in Ukraine, and there's a commercial break, and you see a jaunty little humorous ad for a car insurance company, it feels tone deaf. Mm-hmm. You ask yourself, are you kidding me? And I think that we need to respect the fact that the way that consumers respond to messages is in context of how they're feeling about the world at that time. If you're not paying attention to how your consumers are feeling, this issue that has us all worried, that has us all having sleepless nights, both for the people of Ukraine and for our own economy, then you're going to look like you're not paying attention to the human beings that you actually serve.
Yeah, it's a great point. I hope that somewhere in the midst of all this tragedy, there's an opportunity for companies to make smart human decisions about how they operate and where their brands live and what they do and what they don't do, but also make smart business decisions. And at times like this, maybe those two things come together in a way where if I do the right thing and I help where I can help, not only will I be doing the right thing for the people who need that help, it'll be a smart business decision because people who I need to appeal to as consumers or customers will see me do that and give me credit for it, and that'll make them more likely to want to engage with my company. It could be an opportunity for a win-win on both sides.
Which is always great. I'll say this, one of the things that corporations always worry about is if I take a stand that might be seen as political, am I going to have significant pushback? Is my brand going to be in trouble as a result of that? And what we've seen over now decades of companies who have been willing to make social, cultural stands, I don't like to think of them as political, we haven't seen anyone fall apart as the result of standing for what they believe is right. Mm-hmm. We haven't seen those kind of huge economic penalties paid for companies who do the right thing in their eyes and in the eyes of their customers. So I think what we can say is for brands who are considering whether or not it is safe to take social, cultural stands, it is, but I would guide those decisions based on right and wrong, not on right or left. Mm-hmm. We still live in a country, in a world, that understands that certain things, like treating your neighbor poorly, that's wrong. And that other things, like celebrating family, like celebrating independence, like celebrating equality, That's the right side of things. There's no political side to that. It's just right and wrong. If you're celebrating what's right with your brand, you're going to be more rewarded than you are going to be penalized. As a matter of fact, there is no evidence of brands being penalized for taking positive stands about what they believe to be right.
Yeah, and we've all sat in those conference rooms in those meetings where we're talking with people who represent big, powerful brands, and we say, what position are you going to take on this issue? And their first reaction is, we're not touching that. That's too hot. We don't want to talk about that. And I think what we're seeing is that the world is shifting to a place where if you manage a large enough and prominent enough brand, and something happens in the world that is controversial, that garners the attention of lots of people. Let's say the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, right? If you run Disney, as convenient as it would be to stay silent because it feels safe, you're going to get called out and you're going to get in trouble if you don't say something.
Absolutely.
And I think what we saw with Disney, with the recent dust up around the new CEO, is that he took an old-fashioned approach, which is, I'm not in that business. That's not anything to do with theme parks and cruise ships and movies. I'm not touching that political hot potato. And he got called out and got in trouble for it. 20 years ago, you might have been able, 30 years ago, you might have been able to get away with that. You can't get away with that now because consumers expect you to stand up and say what you think about those things.
That's interesting. It means that the risk has moved.
It's shifted. Exactly.
It's shifted from more risk if you speak up to more risk if you don't.
Yeah, it looks cowardly. All right, obviously lots to talk about in the brand space, given everything that's going on in the world. So if you have any thoughts and want to share your own point of view, we would love to hear it. So just put it in the comments below, and we'd love to hear from you. But let's bring Bart back and talk about Basic City. So Bart, what's going on in the city right now?
Hey man, this is a topic I like to talk about. Just to start with, sort of historical entrance. Basic City was a town that was in Virginia in the 1900s.
It was actually a place.
Yes,
I
it
did
was
know
on the
that.
outskirts
Cool.
of Waynesboro, at the foot of the mountain, right at the beginning of the valley, the Shenandoah Valley.
Was not named by an advertising guy.
No. They were named after a process that was called the Basic process, which was turning pig iron into steel.
Oh,
So
interesting.
they had a really large plan. Anyway, it doesn't exist anymore, so their plan didn't quite work out. And that works out really well for us because we're Basic City now. There is no geography that is associated with Basic City. So we think Basic City can be anywhere as a concept. And that kind of led into our consideration for how we would expand and what name we would consider for the next spot. And here we are in Richmond with a Basic City RVA. And what we needed to look for basically was something that matched with that turn of the century 1900s industrial that we were already branding.
Yeah.
And we found it here at the Aragon Coffee Building, which is a 1900s
Very
coffee
cool
manufacturing building, and it really has the Richmond sentiment. So it was an easy fit. I actually went to BCU, graduated about 20 years ago, and almost made Richmond home, but life took me elsewhere. Anyway, so it was good to be back in Richmond. I studied at BCU philosophy, literature, and religious studies.
That's very cool.
Had a lot to do with my character as it is now and sculpting my person that I am these days. So near and dear to my heart is Richmond. But to sort of take the step into our understanding of our marketing and our brand, this idea of revisiting the past, reclaiming, repurposing history and making it contemporary and present, and then how we push that into the future is kind of a fundamental for us, foundation for marketing and branding. And that puts us in a spot where we have an opportunity to fill some gaps in the historical record and create a mythology, and that mythology then can touch our people, our patrons, in our brand and in our craft.
You need to be the chief marketing officer, basically.
Yeah,
That's impressive. It's awesome. And actually, as you tell the story of the place and the story of the name and why the space feels the way it does, it makes it that much cooler.
Yeah, I mean, all the pieces
It
that
connects.
are sort of
Totally
like
connects.
industrial defunct,
Yeah.
you know, that
Yeah.
is a history past that brings this sort of, Frankenstein, but really fits and makes an
You
overall
need to
experience.
put the story of Basic City somewhere on the wall that people can read.
That's right.
Yeah.
That would be cool to know.
We have that in Waynesboro.
Yeah.
Now that you're saying it, I will.
Free advice.
Great.
Free advice. All it costs you is a pint of beer.
Cheers.
Cheers. Well, thanks to Bart. Thanks to everybody at Basic City for hosting us. Kelly, as always, thanks. It's always fun. And thanks to you for checking out Beer and Brands. As I said before, put any comments or any thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. And stay tuned for the next installment of Brand Federation's Beer and Brands. We'll see you there.
See you soon.
See you soon.